Hi, Karl Sakas here. Welcome to Agency Office Hours for September 2021. We get together every month during this time live. I'm answering your questions about growing your agency more profitably. Here's a preview of the questions we'll be doing today. Janet in Connecticut has a question about team roles when you outsource fulfillment, and a follow-up question about positioning as it impacts what do you tell your clients when you change your positioning. We'll have a tip about supporting project management. Then Miles in Illinois has a question about connecting business development to capacity planning. A few angles to that, we'll dig in there. And finally, Adrian in Phoenix has a question about what to tell clients when you start a new engagement. How much is just enough rather than too much or too little? If you're on the list there, be ready to unmute yourself. If we didn't get to you, feel free to submit a question next time. We meet live every second Tuesday in this same time slot. As usual, we are recording office hours today, so don't share anything out loud that you do not want to become public. And if you've registered live, you'll get a recording within 24 hours. And a shout out, by the way, to M in Adelaide, Australia, who will be listening to the recording since it is currently 1 a.m. Hi, M. All right. Well, our first question today is from Janet in Connecticut. Let me bring you in here. So Janet, hello and welcome.
Hi, guys.
So when you'd reached out, it sounded like you're in the midst of a big shift for the agency. And
Yes.
There are a number of questions. We're going to focus on sort of 1.5 of those today. First, a mini question about team based on the change in model, which I think is something that a lot of people are going to be wondering about. You know, if you outsource fulfillment, which roles need to continue as employee roles? Let's take a look at that first. Could you elaborate a bit, introduce yourself, share about what the transition looks like?
Sure. So I'm Janet Carlson. I started the first healthcare digitally focused agency, particularly for healthcare professionals, back in 1994. So in New York City, digital agencies didn't exist. So we basically created that category. We didn't do any print until a couple of years ago. And just because we were working with healthcare clients that wanted to have print, we started doing more print stuff. So our areas of focus are healthcare, finance, education, and a wee bit of tourism, but working with the state isn't exactly fun. So there you have it. We went from a very good size agency, over 35 people in New York, and we were so specialized. You know, we would outsource some. We had freelancers, a good number of freelancers just for specialized stuff, if you need coding and those kind of things.
Initially, the freelancers were ancillary.
Oh yeah, very on the periphery. I mean, if you needed somebody for special coding, you don't keep those guys sitting around. App developers. I've never needed to have app developers sitting around, but I have really great guys. If you need animated logos, you have specific guys for that. So those kind of things we still keep around. But so I've been whittling the team down because truthfully, I don't love managing. It's my least favorite part. I like having a core group of grownups that really gets things done. And each of us can really work together and we can wear multiple hats. Any of us can present, any of us can really write. We can do creative. So, by working together, we can do all these things. Yeah, so it's just like after COVID, what I really want to do is just cut the team down as, really to as small a team as possible for just so we could see where's this going to go, what's going to happen. We weren't certain, and I cut it down to the number of people that I could responsibly make sure to take care of through, whatever came down the pike. If it was 2 years, 3 years, or whatever. So now we're down to 3 employees. So we have a chief operating officer, a chief creative director, and then myself. I focus mostly on new business.
Got it.
And I'm head copywriter.
So we're wearing multiple hats. Well, so thinking about it, there are ultimately 6 agency roles. People have been in office hours before. You've heard them before. We've got account management, keep the clients happy, sell them more. Project management, get work done smoothly and profitably. You've got your subject matter experts doing design, development, writing, analysis, those highly billable kind of craft related things. You've got strategist, which is a super SME, They're a subject matter expert who does a lot of account management as well. Their job is to maximize the ROI of the client's budget, where to spend it. You've also got bizdev, which is really about marketing, sales, and partnerships. And then the sixth category is support, which is really about operations and leadership. So it sounds like, Janet, you're in certainly the support role, doing leadership of the business. You have a team member overseeing operations. I imagine they're doing some project management as well. Yes. And then you've got the head of creative, who is doing strategy, portions of the strategy, probably some subject matter expert work, some of the like really high level stuff. In terms of that core team, that makes a lot of sense. As long as someone is doing account management, someone is doing project management to some degree, and doing the strategy, and of course you're doing the support and biz dev work, and it sounds like you're ultimately outsourcing the subject matter expert work. Is that correct?
Well, the subject matter, as far as healthcare goes, that's kind of my domain. So yeah, I opted out of med school. And so medicine and sciences have always been my passion. So I understand it. I mean, from, super complex things, it's not a problem. So I can explain it to the team, because all they need to know is like, this means that, and I simplify it. And then, we go from there. So it's, I can handle that kind of stuff in-house. Finance, we've kind of, we all have worked in that, but I think, each of us kind of brings a different thing to the table. But again, a good chunk of it is going to be healthcare. Probably 80% of our work is going to be focused in the healthcare arena.
Got it. And so with the contractors that you'll have, what is the work you're thinking of having them do? And then we'll talk about your positioning question.
So more of that will be concepting. So when we get up, so for example, we want to go after some more addiction services. Okay. Business, because it's a huge business. It's a cash business. It's a growing business. Alcoholism is up 20% even in women. So it's a big deal. So it's really putting together, where we want to go is more off-road. So we want to take it so that we want to come up with the ideas that other people are afraid to do, would never do, turn things completely on its head. I mean, that's the kind of work we're looking to do. I don't want to be the safe stuff. Most of the addiction services, if you look at their ads, it's people looking off into the clouds on a mountaintop. It's like kind of cloudy. They look like they love to be doing anything other than what they're doing right there. That's most of the stuff. It's super boring. You could put anybody's logo on that stuff. It doesn't matter. That's what bothers me. So I want to do more of the breakout advertising. And it's not going to be for everybody, but we need to find our tribe.
Makes sense. Well, I think, the direction you mentioned, where you're keeping those core services in-house, you're doing some of the subject matter expert, kind of the higher level subject matter expert work, and then you're outsourcing the things that you don't necessarily need all of the time, or that don't necessarily need the same continuity, right? Clients don't want their account manager changing every month. No. But, if they're doing things on a project basis, or if there's some things that, are more behind the scenes, certainly makes sense to outsource that. Well, let's pivot to your follow-up question.
Okay.
So the other question you asked was this: if we are changing our agency's positioning, how do we communicate that to people, including existing clients and others? Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Of course. Yeah. So this came from some reading I was doing late night. I tend to be a night owl. I really shouldn't be, because I've got 3 teenagers, and fortunately my husband tends to go to bed a little bit earlier than me. But I was reading one of the advertising magazines, and one of the statistics that I saw was that in advertising, the average age is 38, and only 5% of advertising globally is for people over 50. That people over 50 are. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Wow. How is that possible? So the idea that I had for my agency was to recruit people over 50 or older. Who are, because so many people are now freelance. There's a ton of talent around me. A lot of people from New York have moved up here. I've heard, and I haven't connected all the dots yet, but I know that there's a lot of people up in my neck of the woods who are freelancing, who are 50 or older, and who have a crap ton of experience, and might be really interesting to bring into different projects. But again, I don't think those people want to join an agency, and I don't think I want them to join an agency.
Sort of
Some of them,
they're done that. They
want something different,
but on their terms rather than, we expect FaceTime for 60 hours a week.
right? Yeah. So I think that, I mean, there was an amazing copywriter from, I don't know, like 5-6 towns over, who'd been seeing some of the stuff that we were writing, some of the campaigns we put out, and he actually contacted us and said, you know what, I want to work with you guys. And we've had a blast working with this guy. This guy is crazy talented copywriter. And so, we'll do brainstorming and concepting, and we've come up with amazing campaigns. So it just made me think that I really want to focus the agency. I want the people on the team to be 50 plus. So my 2 other guys, we're all in our 50s.
Got it.
So, it just makes sense. I think about somebody working on a team who's got 25 years less experience than me. I mean, where I was in my early 30s, it's a world of difference. I mean, I see things completely differently. I remember introducing myself to a board. I was practicing in the mirror, saying my name. That's ridiculous. Now at this age, I wouldn't dream of that. It's so stupid. But I just think the world of difference between your early 30s and your early 50s.
So thinking about, there are a couple of potential angles. One is about your approach to recruiting and staffing the team. Another is around that focus on healthcare. You've done healthcare for a long time, but you've done a number of things. It sounds like narrowing the focus. What are you wondering about from a telling client's perspective? What is currently unclear?
So I guess what I'm wondering is that a good position? Is that something that clients would be like, oh my God, I totally want a team that's mature, that has figured things out? I mean, do you tout that, or I don't want to curse, sorry, I'm like the worst on this. I don't want, like, or are they just like, who bloody cares? I don't want a bunch of old people working on my stuff. I mean, I don't think that's the case, but I mean, is this newsworthy? I think it's interesting. I mean, the 5%, I was stunned.
Yeah.
But would clients care? Would it matter? Most of the healthcare stuff is going to impact mature people, less diseases and such, or for younger people.
Right.
So it kind of makes sense. But I'm curious from your perspective, is there a there? Is it interesting to you? Does it sound like a good position? I'm just curious.
And actually, let's open that question up to everyone. So for everyone listening live, if you want to share in chat, what are your thoughts?
I'm very curious
on, is the team makeup, is that something to highlight or not? Love to hear your thoughts. So go ahead and share that in chat. What your advice for Janet is.
Yeah, be brutal. I mean, be honest. I mean, if you're just like, that's just the bloody dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, then fine. Okay. I mean, I would rather hear it.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely curious.
I think there is potentially some potential, depending on how you frame it. For instance, worked with an agency a couple years ago where one of their focuses for the agency based in India was to provide employment for women who were coming back from time away from working, from caring for family members. Now, of course, anyone can be a caregiver, but obviously some societal pressure in that, from that perspective. And so, in that case, that is a core to their recruiting. Not everyone is returning to the workforce, but many of their team members are. However, that's not necessarily part of their positioning. They are not positioning necessarily as the, it's like that we're getting women back to work. On the other hand, I think it depends on your client base. Given the focus on healthcare, where in general there's a focus on caring for others, that may resonate. In the case of your experienced team, I mean, you could also frame it the exact same way, or same result, but framed a different way. If you note that everyone on our team has at least 25 years of experience, or 30 years, or sort of whatever the number ends up being. So in that sense, the focus is about the amount of experience, not necessarily their age. For sure, people over 50 experience age discrimination. There are a lot of problems around that. But it seems the benefit for the clients is primarily you've got people who are extremely experienced that you couldn't afford to hire directly, or maybe it, depending on the work they're doing, may not need someone full-time for that.
Right.
So let's take a look at what people are sharing in chat. So you've got a not newsworthy, could be distracting. There's a comment, there may be a perception that people who are more seasoned may be more traditional rather than digital, but you can address that. Established professional team, total asset. In this example, team has a minimum of 15 years experience in their specialty. Noting you'd have to connect it, great point around what is the value of that, sort of the so what for the clients, because everyone wants to know what's in it for me, WIIFM. Another comment, yes, noting our small team is made up of senior consultants who are all in. A few clients say they appreciate that, and that, there's not a lot of turnover. Great point about if that matches your client demographic, that could be a good fit. And there we go. And Carrie, no problem there. And noting some perception depending on the service. For instance, some clients are like, if it's social media, people need to be young. I remember when I was in high school and college, I learned HTML, started as a web designer, as a freelance web designer, and I was also doing computer training and troubleshooting. And my clients typically were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even into their 80s. And so I think in that case, there was an assumption that as a high school student, I must be tech savvy. And it was sort of, I don't know, it was true. I also went to a science and technology high school where our unofficial mascot was a graphing calculator, a Texas Instruments TI-82, eventually upgraded to a TI-83, which, I guess says something. So, in that sense, there was sort of that stereotype. On the other hand, you probably don't want to work with clients who have kind of a high sense of stereotype. A couple other bits, and then we'll move on to the next question. But saying depends on the service. Another comment, like the phrase that there is no entry-level work on your dime, and that there's a certain level, say director or otherwise, of the person who's doing the work. Indeed, noting competitors who burn through a bunch of entry-level people. There's a lot of turnover. And that, framing the level of experience as a way to defend higher price points. So Janet, from what I've shared, from what people have shared in chat, and thank you to everyone who's shared perspective there, what's your sense of initial next steps?
Well, I'm actually going to put the word out. I'm going to reach through some informal channels right now, just because I have some kind of heavy hitters around me. I know there's some people who are retired, so I'm just going to reach out and just start. I've been surprised, even informally. I reached out to one guy who's the son of Guy Day, so from Chiat Day. And I said, would you be interested in doing a little experimentation, joining a team? And he's like, okay. So I was surprised when I contacted people. I just say, like, this is what I'm thinking about. They're like, why not? Let's just do this. Let's see if it works. So there doesn't seem to be much fear right now. Maybe COVID has kind of let people see that there's a different possibility that you can work like this. I like to work in teams. I like to work and see and interact with the people, but you can get some really great stuff even through distance. And I just think I'm just gonna start trying it, and we'll put together a couple of pitches. Maybe I'll even recruit a team to do our rebranding and repositioning, and then I'll bring it back to you guys and show you what I come up with, and you guys can either yay or nay it. That's cool too.
That sounds promising, and indeed, I think the idea of testing it with live clients and live prospects is really powerful. I'm helping a client through sorting out some of their messaging about new services, their new offerings. And a key thing is, no matter what we come up with in our meeting next week, they still need to test it on their prospects through their marketing and their sales conversation. So Janet, good luck. Let us
Thank
know
you.
how it all goes.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate the input.
Thank you. So coming up shortly, we have a question from Miles related to connecting bizdev to capacity planning and forecasting, and a question from Adrian taking a look at a couple pieces, but primarily around the idea of when you're starting a new client engagement, how much is the right amount to share with your clients? But first, a bonus tip from our sponsor, Sakas & Company. Today's event is sponsored by Agency PM 101, my new on-demand course for people who are deputized project managers. What's a deputized project manager? That's someone who's stuck doing PM on top of all of everything else they have to do, whether that's you or one of your colleagues. People who need to do project management but would rather be doing anything else. And if that's you, first, I'm sorry. And second, it can be a bit easier. So here's a tip from the Agency PM 101 on-demand course. So in the course, it's 4 hours long. You can complete it at your own pace in one afternoon or at lunch over a week or one lunch a week for a month. There's some quick wins and frameworks to help you handle whatever comes up. One of the frameworks is a concept called the iron triangle of project management. The idea of the iron triangle of project management is the relationship between three fundamental things: budget, timeline, and scope. Or if you've heard the joke, good, fast, cheap, pick two, that's actually a joke about the iron triangle. And it's called the iron triangle of project management because those three are tightly related. You generally can't optimize all three at once. You can optimize one or two at a time. Well, so what? Well, you can use this to manage client expectations about what's going to happen in the project or in the retainer. Project management applies to ongoing retainers as well. If you're hiring a project manager, by the way, and want to include a trick question in the interview process, ask them, with the iron triangle, budget, timeline, scope, which is most important? The answer, of course, is it depends on the client's priorities. It depends on the agency's priorities. For instance, I once had a client as a director of client services where they were building something, we were building something for them, and we gave them two options, two ways to do it, option A, option B. Either would be a match. It was ultimately up to the client to decide in that particular case. They thought, okay, we'll go with option A. We built option A. Then the client said, you know what? I'd like to go with option B. I said, you're going to have, we'll have to charge you for that and all that. He's like, yeah, it's fine. We built option B. And then after a couple more weeks, his internal stakeholders changed their mind and we went back, yes, to option A, which was cheaper than building option B in the first place. But that was a case where for him, scope was his top priority. He didn't care that things were taking longer or that he had to pay extra money to go from A to B and back to A again. For him, getting it just right for his stakeholders is the top priority. On the other hand, you've probably worked with clients where timeline is the top priority. For instance, they have an event coming up and you're creating something to support the event. That has got to be done. Timeline is immovable. On the other hand, the scope of what you do may be flexible. You could cut back on scope. Maybe it's also a situation where they're willing to spend more money. If you need to bring in additional team members, maybe you've got a couple things that you would plan to do in series, but you could do them in parallel. In that case, you might be able to split it up. And, you also might have clients thinking about the iron triangle of budget, timeline, scope. Maybe budget is fixed. Perhaps they're a nonprofit that has gotten a grant to do something. They cannot spend any more than the budget, but there might be some flexibility on timeline and or scope. So thinking about the iron triangle, whenever you start a new engagement, and we'll talk more about this in a bit, when you're starting a new engagement, ask your clients which is most important to them. And if the client is like, we need all of these, it must be perfectly on time, perfectly on budget, and perfectly on scope, they have somewhat unrealistic expectations. That's just not how it works in reality. So press on what is most important, and you can ultimately take it from there. If you'd like to learn more about the Agency PM 101 course on demand for people who are doing project management on top of everything else as deputized PMs, we've shared a link to that in chat if you'd like to check it out. I believe it will help you save at least 10 hours of billable time. What's the price? A fraction of that compared to what you would be billing that time out at. All right. Well, next up, we have a question from Miles about tying business development to capacity planning. Miles, if you want to unmute yourself and come on, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Karl. Thanks, everyone.
So the question you asked, to paraphrase, is this, and we'll dig in.
Sure.
Question is, how do we tie business development to our forecasting and capacity planning? Please elaborate a bit and we'll answer it.
Sure. Yeah. So we're an agency that services almost entirely not-for-profit organizations. So we're working on slim margins. We try to we're out about an hour outside Chicago, so we kind of keep we try to run a tight ship for our clients. Almost entirely time and materials contracts. We're sort of in a non-retainer. Usually they're relatively small, but we are super collaborative, and our clients love working with us. So typically, like, a small engagement will turn into a long-term engagement, which is great problem to have.
Yeah.
However, we haven't really grown in our ability to be aware of tracking projects when they're coming to an end, how much staff we have, and then getting that sort of connected to what the business development is going on. And so my role, I'm the general manager and director of client services. You know, we're an agency of we got about 20 people, and I kind of have the role of operations and then also bringing in a new business. So it's sort of funny, like half of me doesn't really know what the other half of myself is doing. And mostly because yeah, exactly. So I spend so much time with our leaders, and so we kind of divide up into marketing, design, and software. And I have a pretty good sense of what's going on, but it seems like it's always a conversation of, can we fit these people in? And of course, because they're not for profit and we kind of align in mission, there's always this heart of like, of course they need help. They have something going on in a month, and who doesn't want to help, not for profit raise funds to help do their mission. So we kind of have a heart on our sleeve situation, but we're having a hard time understanding how to really forecast, how to tie that together with what we can pull off feasibly, and then making sure that our pipeline is aligned. Either it feels like it's boom or bust, where I'll have a meeting with our director of software and he's like, oh my gosh, I've got the guys working on internal projects to try to fill time, or we can't possibly take on another project where, we're underneath it. And it feels like we're kind of in that cycle all the time.
There are a lot of pieces going on. In a sense, we've got sales pipeline, predicting, forecasting your sales pipeline, which is its own challenge. You can do a weighted pipeline to get a sense of things. But, if clients sometimes just pop up, if there's the boom or bust, it could be hard to predict that. You've also got your capacity planning, which is current and medium term. You're looking out, say, over the next month or so, the next week.
Correct.
Few weeks. And then you've also got forecasting, where you're trying to identify, well, what's going to happen next quarter? What's going to happen next year? Because you have to make hiring decisions that are further out than just next week.
Yeah, exactly.
So the fact that this is a challenge, you are not alone. I suspect everyone who is on the live call and everyone who's watching the video has struggled with this at some point. Because each of those areas, right? Sales pipeline, projections, capacity planning, shorter term, and forecasting, each of those is hard. And when you need to make them all tie together, it's even harder. So if it's like, this is difficult, yes, it sure is.
Okay.
But there are some things you can do to make it run more smoothly, both in terms of your process and also how you staff things. So let's take a look at those. When it comes to sales pipeline, the typical approach that people use is some sort of a weighted pipeline. you've got an opportunity that's $20,000, $50,000, $5,000, $1 million, and you're going to assign a percentage likelihood of it closing. If someone has just reached out, the odds are probably pretty low. Maybe it's 10% or so. On the other hand, say you've done a proposal, the client has said they're moving forward, maybe they've signed it but haven't paid yet. Okay, that's 90%. Sometimes I have clients who pay then sign. I don't know if I'd recommend that order, but in that case, it's pretty likely. Of course, the challenge is, what about in the middle? Maybe you have an initial conversation, maybe there's a proposal. You have to decide. But the advantage of that is that gives you an idea of, if you look at the weighted value, what's the dollar value of work you need to deliver? And in your case, Miles, where you mentioned you've got the different divisions, you've got the software division, the digital division, the marketing division, each of those to an extent might have their own pipeline, which there is an opportunity to that, which is, to what extent can people be cross-trained to do different things? My guess is people who are doing software development, there's going to be some overlap on the web development side and vice versa. The people on the team doing marketing may not be quite the same overlap, but if you've got someone who's, say, a project manager, as a PM, I was doing ongoing marketing, I was doing design, some print projects, was doing app development, and so the more cross-trained people are, the more they can help out the other teams as needed. So that's a piece. But so sales pipeline is one. Then you've got capacity planning, which is, what's happening this week and over the next few weeks. A lot of that gets into estimating the work involved. You can do a work breakout, look at past engagements. How long did you think it would take and how long did it actually take? I get a lot of questions from clients around, how do we calculate the exact per hour cost of labor? And there are ways to do that. But I would also say, for someone who's wondering about that, make sure you're not going over budget all the time. I had a client in Texas where they were like, what's the exact labor cost? And I said, it's important, but from what we've discussed, from my digging in, they were going over budget by 50 to 80%. I'm like, fix that first, then worry about the labor cost. Stop going over budget so much, because if you're 80% over budget, it doesn't matter what the labor costs are. That's bad. So getting a sense of what does it actually take, getting accurate about the estimates, and sometimes that includes getting ranges from your team. There are some things you'll have a library of estimates, but if it's something new, custom, what have you, you could ask your relevant subject matter expert or multiple SMEs, what do you think this will take? And they might give you a number and say, well, it's a range. What's the optimistic case? What's the worst case? So, they might initially say, oh, that'll take 10 hours. And they're like, well, what about worst case? They're like, oh, it could be 30. Best case, 8. All right, well, so if you've got that kind of distribution, 8, 10, 30, maybe you assume it's like 12 or 15, just in case. That's a somewhat risk managed. If you want to be super risk managed, you assume 30. Kind of depends on what people are doing and also their level of experience. In your director of client services hat, the more you can do to pad things, the happier people tend to be in the end, even if people don't love hearing that it's going to take longer up front.
Sure.
So some of that is sorting out your estimates on capacity planning. And then in terms of long-term forecasting, that's hard. A lot of that comes down to how good is your marketing pipeline. At this point, 8+ years into my business, where I've been doing consistent marketing all along, people are reaching out every week. Not everyone is necessarily a match, or it could be different things, but there's a consistent pipeline. So in that sense, it's like, okay, there's a trajectory. On the other hand, if it's all kind of feast and famine, boom and bust, you might consider, what are some things you can do to make your own marketing more consistent? You mentioned, for instance, the software team working on internal things. Ideally, your digital marketing team, kind of the ongoing team, has standby things to do to help the agency's own marketing. And at 20 people, you're about at the point where you could have one or almost one FTE working on your self-marketing. How do you currently approach your self-marketing, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, we promoted someone internally to sort of take that hat on. She left, sort of a COVID casualty. And so we haven't quite refilled that, but it's going on almost a year. So I'd say the majority of our work is coming in through referral, which is great, but
yes.
There's not a ton of self-marketing going on. And I think part of this conversation is we're trying to figure out, I think there's some hesitancy to sort of grow the self-marketing because we're growing sustainably, the referrals are going well.
Right.
But it's this like, okay, if we pour gasoline on that fire and we're already having a hard time capacity planning and forecasting, do we really want to sort of take that direction? So right now it's, it's kind of a hat. It's myself, our director of creative services, our president's out there beating bushes at, events and things like that. That's kind of where we're at.
Let's look at two things that are a mix of strategy and tactics that'll help deal with the surges.
Great.
One is building a stable of freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that all things considered, ideally your full-time team is doing the work.
Yep.
In a sense, I would describe that, I have an article on this, your cheapest competent available person. If you've got two people and one of them is less per hour, go with the less expensive person.
Yep.
But they both have to be competent. They both have to be available. You could have someone who's super expensive, but they're the only one available. Well, they are the cheapest competent available person. Maybe don't tell your team, by the way.
Sure.
I'm assigning this to you because you are the cheapest competent available person. But I mean, a PM is thinking about that.
Yeah.
So, that's a piece where if you have freelancers that are under contract, that are vetted, you've decided they can do the work, what their rate or rates are going to be, especially with time and materials, you want to ideally match your client billing model to your internal labor model. Mm-hmm. Or at least you don't want to be doing fixed cost work and pay time and materials, because then that can be bad, very bad. So, the idea is that you have, say, eventually 3 to 5 people in each type of work, 3 to 5 designers, 3 to 5 front-end developers, 3 to 5 back-end developers, and there could be some overlap. But the idea on 3 to 5 is that if you suddenly need help, you've got several people to reach out to, because odds are some of the 3 to 5 are booked, but at least one of them is available. And you also don't want 10 or 20, because if they never hear from you, like I haven't heard from you in 2 years and you need me to do something next week. No, I can't do that. Right. So the idea is 3 to 5 in each kind of skill area.
Okay.
So that's important. So when the surge comes in, you can handle it, or at least you're not panicking quite as much. And then you call people. So, whether that's you as general manager or someone else building that stable of freelancers, sometimes a head of operations will do it. Sometimes a senior project manager will do it. But basically it's figuring out, what do we need going forward? And let's start filling in the gaps.
Got it.
So that's one piece. The other piece to consider is whether, if you've got, if these surges are consistent, maybe the nature of what is surging varies, but it happens every week. You may want to consider reserving one of the full-time team members to handle stuff like that. Some agencies will do that where they've got multiple developers, and one of the developers is the sort of maintenance and support developer. Usually in that case, they like doing small bits of things. They'd rather not work on a months-long project. They like being able to dive in, fix it, done. Usually agencies will have someone doing that who also has good client skills, because then they can just handle it directly, right? The client reaches out, my site is down, the developer can go in and fix it and, kind of handle it from A to Z, or A to Z if you're outside the US. So that's an option. At 20 people, you're on the cusp for whether that makes sense. Okay. I'm not sure I dedicate one full-time person in each of the sort of the segments.
Yeah.
But you could consider if there's a situation where every Friday afternoon something blows up, or things happen over the weekend and Monday morning kind of thing. The alternative solution is just to say one person on each team is unscheduled for one day a week. And you need to decide which day, and that may vary by team, but based on past experience, get it done. And if it's not clear, if there's a pattern, you might make Friday their unscheduled day, because then if they had to handle something earlier in the week, it can push things a bit. But what's your reaction to what we've covered so far?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the capacity, like I love the weighted pipeline conversation, especially around, we have a pretty good, like you mentioned, a pretty good library of estimates. Because we're time and materials, we're tracking everything all the time. And so the majority of the work that we're doing is relatively repeatable, right? Like we kind of know what a social media advertising campaign looks like, or, software is interesting because it's pretty custom, but the guys all do Scrum. So we have a pretty good, they're pretty good at estimating, and they're constantly refining that skill.
You're making progress all the time.
Exactly. And they're constantly, every piece of work they're doing, they're saying it's going to take me between 2 and 4 hours. So I love the weighted pipeline concept. We've played around with that. We never found a CR or like a sales CRM that we liked. And I know they had the weighted pipeline tools, and we just sort of got away from it. So I think going back to that's really great. I love the idea of pairing up what is our like hours or the amount that we can actually of work that we can do, tying that into that weighted pipeline. And then I also like the risk. We never really thought about that risk management piece of, okay, if the estimate's 8 to 30, budget 12 to 15, because I think we tend to either do like it's either 8 or 30. So I really love that idea of weighting that risk. And then, the freelance bench, we've been, it's been an ongoing piece that we've been discussing here. So we have some of that in some of our spaces. That's really helpful. And I love the idea of like trying to understand these surges and seeing if we want to resource. So I think especially that weighted pipeline, understanding capacity and weighting risks is super helpful. And then someone, I think Drew, reached out in a direct message with a tool called Parallax that I'm going to check out. So I appreciate that, Drew. I wasn't able to type back because I was listening to Karl, but I'll take a look at that as well as far as resource planning. So I think those are really helpful.
Drew, thank you for sharing. And Miles, as you're working through this, part of it also will be managing the president's expectations about what's possible, and also managing the board's expectations about what's possible. There are limits to how much you can predict things perfectly, but you can make it better. And I think the thing to consider would be, whenever it comes to predictions, we can think about the idea of a high fidelity prediction, like extremely precise and accurate, ideally, and a low fidelity prediction, which is like directionally accurate, but may not be 100% there. And so you have to decide. For instance, I was at an agency that once had 3 full-time project managers. We used the Microsoft Project resource pool. I don't know if there are many agencies that use Microsoft Project anymore these days, but such as it is. And we had a very accurate idea of capacity planning, but one of the PMs spent like 1 or 2 days a week on capacity planning.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, anywhere from 20 to 40% of an FTE out of 3 PMs and, larger agency on capacity planning. So there, the goal was a high fidelity situation. In one of my early roles, I was involved, among other things, doing performance attribution software for my employers, a social impact mutual fund, our bond fund. And we were trying to figure out, attribution-wise, what was helping, what was hurting, so we can make better decisions going forward. And one of the things that I was starting with was, okay, let's load the whole portfolio into the tool based on what we know. We were buying and selling things. And let's compare, what does the tool say the performance was over that time, and what was the actual performance? And it never matched. We had people coming out from the software vendor in person to try to fine tune things. And, I worked on that part-time for 6 months, and it never lined up. And I think that was a case where maybe, and this wasn't my decision at the time as, an entry-level employee, if we had accepted that it was, not a complete match, but was close enough, maybe it would have been okay. But I'd say decide that early in the process, especially as you find the sales projections, and that'll make things a lot less frustrating as you move forward.
No, that's super helpful. And then I guess one small follow-up, maybe it's an article that you have or some thoughts. When we're looking at knowing when to hire, do you have benchmarks for X amount of capacity or X number of freelancers that are being engaged for, in a Y amount of time? Is there a way you can kind of direct me to some thought? And I know it's going to be different agency to agency, but generally, when do we pull the trigger on hiring? And when do we sort of just work a little extra and hope it kind of calms down next week?
So, and by the way, Adrian, you can go ahead and you'll be joining shortly for your question. So the question is, how do you know when to hire full-time? My general benchmark is that if you have freelancers doing 15 to 20 hours a week of a particular type of thing, every week, week in, week out, it probably makes sense to hire full-time because you're usually paying freelancers twice as much per hour as you would pay a full-time person. If you only need 5 hours here and there, it doesn't make sense to hire full-time. But if you're doing 20 hours every week of a particular thing, you're ultimately spending the same amount of money, roughly, as you would to hire a full-time person, but you're only getting half the hours. So 15 to 20, I would consider hiring full-time.
Perfect. Thanks for answering the bonus question. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Miles. Let us know how it goes. And Adrian, we'll bring you in here. And this will be the final question. By the way, if anyone had a question you'd like me to answer in a future event, Diane will be sharing on chat how to submit a question for future months, the second Tuesday of each month. All right. Well, Adrian, thank you for joining and welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So to paraphrase the question you asked, and we'll dig in on answering, you had asked, when we start a new client engagement, how much should we share? We don't want to share too much and we don't want to share too little. What is just right? So if you could, please elaborate and we'll answer.
Yes, so with our clients, we have some clients that are more sophisticated or savvy, and we have other clients, this is their first significant project with an agency. So we're trying to figure out what is the balance, because we're at a point where we're creating decks and guides for literally everything as far as the size of assets, the type of assets they should share with us, the expected resolution, how to use Facebook Business Manager. I mean, you name it, we have a deck for everything, and it's just become an encyclopedia of how to manage a project, and which would be fine if we were getting paid for this work, but we're really not. So I just, was curious, do you have a recommended balance, or is it more of kind of learning to dance with the client and understanding what their need is? So I'm open to hearing from you for sure.
I do recommend customizing it to the client's level of sophistication. If we're thinking of this as, kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, not too hot, not too cold, just right. The challenge is just right is going to vary. If you're working with a small or medium business where your contact is the owner of the business or someone who's working directly with the owner, depending on their prior experience, they may be quite savvy, but they also are juggling a million other things. On the other hand, I noticed this at the two agencies where I was an employee. One had a wide range of clients, anywhere from small businesses to large corporations. At the second agency was large nonprofits and large companies. And at the second agency, our clients were professional marketers. Mm-hmm. So, varying levels of competence, but ultimately this was the work they were doing. They, they were, had at least some degree of experience. So you might want to consider you may need two levels of client education. You may need the kind of baseline, here's marketing. And then for others, it's more about, here's our approach and how it ties into what we need from you. In a sense, you could think of it if you were building kind of a frequently asked questions, you might say, for instance, you need a copy of the client's logo at the beginning of something. you might have a version of, we need a vector logo. And then there's what's a vector logo? So if someone knows, they just know to send you a vector logo. If they don't know, then they can read to learn more. I discovered that at one agency as a director of client services where we're doing a web development project. We needed their logo. I asked the client for a vector logo, and they sent a file back called vectorlogo.jpg. I knew that if it was a JPEG, it was definitely not a vector image, in spite of what the file name was. So, I knew from my, high school and college web design experience, okay, that wasn't what we need. And so I went back to the client, rather than just forwarding that to the creative team. I said, hey, thanks for sharing that. That's not quite what we need. Do you have any logo files that end in .eps or .ai or .pdf? If so, that's the one we need. So they sent a follow-up and we were good to go. Whereas, if they had been, an experienced marketer, they probably would have known it. Though sometimes clients' assessments of competence doesn't always align. Like the time that my agency had done some web work, we had a client who wanted to take it in-house. They hired a front-end developer, so he claimed. We had offered to help them find the new person on a paid basis, as we've done for others. They're like, no, we got it. They hired this guy. Our front-end developer was describing, she was describing some of the particulars of our setup. And she was mentioning something about version control, right? Keeping track of iterations of things. And not only, talking about version control, that was very confusing to him. That was perhaps a sign. And then was talking about browser debugging tools. And not only did he not use browser debugging tools as a supposed front-end developer, he had never heard of the concept before. Like, imagine the client hires a designer and they're like, Photoshop. Oh, that sounds really, I'm going to look into that. How do you spell it? Yeah, but if you have multiple layers, if you've got the sort of summary version and then the click to learn more, whether it's a tooltip, like on the vector logo, it's like, it probably ends in .pdf or this or that kind of thing, and then click to learn more. That can actually be a sales strength. You can say, we really value helping our clients understand the work, but only as much as they want to. If you want to know everything about the nature of the work, we can help. And if you want just kind of a general, quick overview, we'll adjust for you, but you're adjusting in the sense that it's, you've already got this library of content and things like that. With all of this, something that a lot of agencies struggle with is content delays. And in chat, if you're joining live, we've shared some articles on that. There's also software by a guy named Jimmy Rose, who built software called Content Snare to solve the problem he has related to getting content from clients. And you could do it manually, it depends on the volume you're doing. But the idea is that, let's make it as simple as possible. Let's make it easy for distracted clients, kind of thing. And I like his solution. We've shared it. It is an affiliate link, but even if you don't buy it, Content Snare, check out on their homepage. They have a great 2 to 3 minute video explaining how the service works. And it's a great format. You should consider stealing it for your agency about, here's the problem we're solving, here's, why and how, kind of thing. So Adrian, from what we've covered so far, what's your sense of the right next step for you?
I love the idea of what you're mentioning. I'll check out those tools and we'll continue to build. And I think the pick your path is almost like you're saying, having a variation is probably what we'll go with for sure.
Kind of a choose your own adventure.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Perfect.
Thank you for asking. Good luck as you work through that. And thank you to everyone who has joined Office Hours today. We are here every month, every second Tuesday live. If you have questions, share them when you sign up for the event. You have the option to share about the question. I'll let you know ahead of time if you're on the list. And sometimes we have time for ad hoc questions as well. So if you're listening live, you'll get the recording within 24 hours. And Look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for all the work you're doing to grow your agency and create a better life for you and your family and your team. Thank you, and good luck out there. See you next time.